This is the pre-application meeting. It's intended for artists who are interested in applying for a public art commission through the city of Denver. The one we're going to talk about specifically today is Buchtel Boulevard, which will also kind of be referred to as Prairie Park. To introduce myself, I am Lauren Hagee. I'll be the project manager on this call. So as things move forward, I am sort of the main point of contact for this project. We have other project managers on the team who manage other projects. And we are going to look at the agenda real quick. I'll give a quick overview of the public art program and the selection process. I know some of you are familiar and it's not maybe necessarily what you're really here to learn, so I'll keep it brief. If you have more in-depth questions on the program's history or things like that, you can always send me an email to get more information. We'll go over what materials are required to submit. All of these things are listed in the RFQ that you have hopefully seen by now. But this will be a nice way to just reiterate all of those required materials and answer questions on them. We'll talk about the project and then we'll have a question and answer on the project. And then, like I said, at that point, you all can log off or you can stay on if you want a tutorial on just how to use call entry. Okay, so Denver's public art program has been around for a little while. It was started in 1988 by executive order by then Mayor Pena, and then it was adopted as an ordinance in 1991. So it is a city ordinance, and it does specify that any capital improvement project from the city of Denver that has a budget of over $1 million is required to set aside 1% of that complete budget for the creation of public art. That's how we've been able to install more than 400 pieces since that ordinance was created. And there's over 530 artworks in the collection because it also includes some historic pieces that were kind of part of the city before this ordinance went into place. So in this case, for Buchtel, the public art is being funded by a capital improvement project that sets about improving street and pedestrian safety in the university neighborhood. So we'll talk a little bit more about that because it could be related to how you interpret the art and that piece. So public art, for any of you maybe who are just starting to get into public art versus, just artwork in galleries or museums or just for yourself, there are some specific things to think about when we think about public art. It has particular goals that are a little unique from maybe something in a gallery. The first is that the artwork is meant to be site-specific and unique, created in response to the place and community in which it is placed, meaning it's not mass-produced, it's not just purchased and put down there. It should really speak to the users, people who live there, people who travel through there. Perhaps it interprets history of the place or addresses a social or environmental issue. Each public art call will have different specifics, and we'll talk about how that works with ours because the panel who is judging the work might put forth different priorities. But the goal is that it should enhance the site that it's located in for everyone who experiences that space. A major tenet of public art, at least specifically with our program and many others, is that commissioned artworks go through a public selection process. So this is defined by the ordinance. It is to ensure an open, fair, and transparent process, and the artwork is therefore selected by members of the community and other stakeholders, not necessarily by the public arts. So this allows the citizens of Denver, of that area, to directly impact their community by choosing the artwork. So what is public art is a question worth considering. It can take many forms. This is certainly not an all-inclusive list, and there's always things being added. But just kind of as a starting point, these are some mediums that we tend to see pretty frequently and that are particularly well suited for public art. You see a lot of sculptural work, from more traditional bronze and marble to, maybe newer metal, interactive. We have paintings, whether that's a mural piece or a framed painting on an interior call. Some of our interior calls, we also see printmaking, drawing, photography. We have a number of film and multimedia pieces. Outdoors or indoors, we see a lot of mosaics. Not as often, but some calls we specifically are looking for like clay, fiberwork, plastic, glass. Also earthworks and light and sound art. It's a little easier sometimes to think about maybe what isn't considered public art, at least in terms of, our program. Kind of like I referred to before, we're generally speaking about, mass-produced objects. So if you are a maker who has a particular piece that you make multiples of and you want to install in this location, that's not necessarily what we're looking for. We're looking for something that is made in specific conversation with that work or with that location and is unique. Signage, wayfinding, advertising, there can be some really beautiful versions of those things, but for our program, those aren't considered public art. Here we have an example to the right of a wayfinding piece that is, visually appealing, but would not be considered public art. However, this little sculpture of the camera on the side actually is a piece in our collection. Reproductions of pre-existing artwork is not something that we're looking for. And then in general, landscaping or sort of, plant-based works aren't what we're looking for. There are exceptions to that, but in general, we're looking for artwork that is going to last, in perpetuity, in as long as possible. And so artworks that are made of organic materials like plants are often pretty hard to manage on the long term. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, Denver Public Art goes through a public selection process, which is monitored by two different committees to ensure a fair and equitable process and encourages a wide and diverse range of panelists. I want to reiterate at this point that myself, the project manager, or any of the public art staff in general do not get a vote in the final artwork. We are there to facilitate the process, providing support to the artists as well as the panelists. So we're sort of just a facilitator and do not get to choose the artwork itself. Instead, the selection panel is composed of a composition that is defined by the ordinance. So it'll always include these categories. There's always going to be 3 or more community members. Those are people who live or work right in sort of the project area. We're always going to have an artist and an arts professional serve on the panel as well. So that's something to think about too as an artist. If you would ever be interested in being considered to be an artist on a selection panel, there is a way to apply on the website. It can be really great insight on just like what the process looks like from the back end, and it can help kind of inform future applications. Of course, if you're the artist on that particular panel, you can't apply for that call, but it could help for any others. We have a member of the Public Art Committee and the Denver Commission on Cultural Affairs. Those are our 2 oversight committees. And then we have a representative from City Council. Sometimes that is the council person themselves, and other times it is their aide. So the selection process is also defined, so it always takes kind of similar steps. You can see this is a long process. Where we're at right now is just step 2, where we are requesting qualifications, not proposals. So we're asking for applications of your previous work and your interest to submit a proposal. After that, the panel members will review and score everyone's work independently. Then we will meet as a group and we'll narrow it down to 3 to 5 finalists. Those finalists then have a proposal time period where they get more information, they meet with community members, they learn a lot more technical information about the site, and then they ultimately present it to the panel. They also receive an honorarium to create that proposal. And then once proposed, the panel will make their decision, and then once it's approved, then we can move forward with officially selecting that commission. Here's just a visual of that same process, just a little easier to see. So we're at where that yellow square is. There's quite a bit further to go. And let's see what else. So again, just to reiterate, with the RFQ stage, we're not looking for proposals, we're looking for qualifications. So we're asking for 4 to 6 images of your previous work, your artist statement, and your resume. While you probably could have amazing ideas already for this project, we only review specific proposals from the finalist group, not from the open RFQ call. Okay, so now we will run through the required materials to submit for this RFQ. Again, all of this is outlined in detail in the RFQ itself, so read it, refer back to it, but we can talk a little more in depth about those different qualifications. And these are generally the same requirements for every Denver Public Art call, so they may be familiar to you if you've applied in the past. So we ask for 4 to 6 digital images of past work. We allow for 1 video. One little thing to keep in mind if you are submitting a video of previous work, this is just a little quirk of Cafe. I would put that video as the last image in your slide deck. If it's first, for some reason, it just kind of shows up as a blank white square. So I can talk more about that, but just something to know about the video is kind of put your images first and then put the video as the last slide in your application. Okay, so we also require a resume and a statement of interest no longer than 2,000 characters. So as you prepare, you want to consider how your images and your statement of interest can really speak to the specific goals that are listed in the RFQ and can indicate an interest in that specific community or project. I'll talk more about this, but if this is your first time doing a public art project, or maybe you are switching to a new medium that you haven't done before, the statement of interest can really help you in terms of speaking to that and clarifying any misconceptions. It can be a way that you can really tell the panel, like, you know, if you're only seeing mural images, but it's a sculptural call, the statement of interest can kind of help clarify that you understand that and that you're looking to switch to sculpture, or just really do a good job of expressing your interest in that particular project. Images, you all, I'm sure, are familiar, but it always is important to emphasize just how critical they are. Each panelist will look over your entire application in detail, but their first impression is always going to be your images. So you want them to be high quality. They don't need to be of previous public artwork commissions. Again, if you're just getting into public artwork and you only have images of your work, you know, on its own or in a gallery setting, you know, that's fine. So, you know, just make sure that you maybe indicate that in your statement of interest or in your image descriptions. And you want to make sure that you're choosing images that are appropriate in size, that aren't small and pixelated, don't have poor lighting. Cafe does require some specifications. It allows JPEG uploads only, and it has a minimum pixel requirement of 1,200 pixels. So if it's your first time applying through Cafe, I would definitely set some time aside, you know, before this application is due to start uploading your images and make sure they fit the qualifications and that you have all the labels and that everything is uploaded correctly. And again, we can go over that at the end if you are new to Cafe. So here are just 2 images that are good examples of kind of, you know, they're both good work, but one image shows the work more successfully than the others. So on the left, this artwork, it's an interesting photo, but the public artwork itself is pretty far away, not in great focus, and it's not really clear the details of the artwork itself. Whereas the image on the right gives us a really good sense of scale. It fills the entire frame and it has good lighting. Please also be clear in your image descriptions if any of your past work that you're including were a collaborative effort. That's fine. We have many artists that work with teams or partner with different artists, or maybe they were sort of working as an apprentice. Those are still eligible to apply, but we ask that you disclose that in your artwork label. So there'll be room when you upload your pictures in Cafe to add a little memo, and you can just put like made in collaboration with artist X. If you don't disclose it, you run the risk of a panel member possibly misinterpreting that you're claiming work to be solely your own when perhaps it was made as a partnership. Okay, the resume section is pretty self-explanatory, but you want to upload a copy of your resume that's no more than 2 pages long for an individual artist. If you are submitting as an artist team, submit one page per team member only. We ask that you name your resume file, last name, first initial. Sometimes with groups or teams, that can be hard to know exactly how to label it. Don't worry too much about it. The larger point is just that it's consistent with the name that's on your application or any of your other labels so that we know that they all go together. Okay. And so, like I said earlier, every RFQ will require a statement of interest with 2 to 3 questions. Some of the questions are consistent. You will see them across calls. They'll be a little more general, but sometimes the panel can choose to ask a more specific or unique question. So take the time to look at them and make sure that you're not just copying and pasting from another City of Denver application because it could be a different question. It's important, I think, to stress how important the statement of interest can be to the panel, especially, like I said, if you're a newer artist without experience or you're switching mediums. So take time, don't do them like the night before. And I know you guys apply to lots of calls, but it happens quite often that there'll be a completely different project name in the statement of interest, and that just usually doesn't leave a very good impression on the panel. So just make sure that you proofread it and make sure that it's, of course, going to the correct call and that you've answered their questions in detail. A couple other little cafe things. Those of you that are more familiar probably already know this, but it can be a little glitchy. So if you are copying and pasting your statement of interest from, say, Microsoft Word, you might be copying over some weird, like hidden characters or just kind of strange characters. So again, just another warning to just really read that carefully and make sure that it hasn't copy and pasted over with some weird formatting issues. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the project in general, but we can go back to any questions on that at the end. So as I said earlier, this project is funded by the University Neighborhood Safer Streets Project, which is led by the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. This is one component of a larger citywide program to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety. In this case, it involves, a change to like street signals, pedestrian crossings, bike lanes. However, when I met with the selection panel to first discuss this project, they decided that rather than citing the work sort of in a median, on a road, or in a walkway, which all have sort of logistical ADA and maintenance concerns, they were much more interested in locating this work in a green space that runs right along the Buchtel Boulevard, the historic Buchtel Trail, which is between Colorado and University Boulevard. So I'll show a little map of that, but it's basically a green space that follows along the boulevard and just is a little more protected and a little more enjoyable space than kind of right in the middle of the road. This project budget, so the public art budget that the commissioned artists will have to work with is approximately $120,000. With our budget, whatever is listed in the RFQ is going to be the minimum amount, so it will never become less than that. We do sometimes have really wonderful moments where additional funding is added, so it could potentially increase a little bit. Another thing that could cause it to increase is if, say, only 3 finalists are chosen by the panel instead of 4 or 5, then you'll see a tiny bit of increase there too, because the project budget is also what supports travel stipends and honorariums for the finalists. So 120,000 would be the minimum. It could be a little more, but that's kind of the budget that you'd be working with if you were commissioned to make this artwork. We are looking for an outdoor artwork. I'll show you some images so you can get a better sense of what the outdoor space looks like. So as such, we're looking for artworks that are going to be made out of mediums that are suitable for outdoor Colorado environments. This panel is really open. They're really just kind of excited to see what could be possible. But they did highlight a few mediums that were of interest or particularly appropriate: of sculpture, mosaic, painting, although we'll talk about that. And then they also were interested in artworks that maybe had natural elements like stone or wood or recycled elements. So these are just things that are of interest to them, not necessarily a required material. Okay. So here is a look at that project area that we'll be discussing. Basically, that blue line of Buchtel Boulevard is our project area. This is from the Dottie website. So if you are interested in the capital improvement project and everything that's being done, you can go to the Department of Transportation website through the City of Denver to learn more. I won't be talking in depth about that larger capital improvement project since we are here just to talk about the public art component, but it can be kind of interesting to see, what all is included there. If you're less familiar with the Denver area, here is just a sort of zoomed out map of Denver with Denver neighborhoods to give you context of kind of where this fits within the city. So the project area that we're discussing is technically in the neighborhood of University Park, which is highlighted there in the circle and the arrows pointing at it. So it's in Southeast Denver in District. Here is just a map showing that same area, but it's a historic map showing the diagonal Buchtel Boulevard up top between the east and west boundaries of University and Colorado Boulevard. This is, if you are less familiar, also the neighborhood that the University of Denver is in. So it's a historic university neighborhood with lots of really beautiful old buildings and just a really interesting demographic of students and long-term residents. Here is the current view of sort of that same roadway. So highlighted there in the circle is our diagonal Buchtel Boulevard. And you'll see Prairie Park highlighted. And it's really just, let me see if I can get a pointer. There we go. Yeah, so kind of just running right alongside the boulevard is just sort of a green belt that I didn't even know was a park technically, but it is. It's a really beautiful space. I'll show you some more pictures, but that'll kind of be the preferred project area in our panel. It is technically a 14-acre long park that features native plants and has paved and natural trails along it for biking and walking. Here are some images of that area. The first thing I wanted to note is that this is a native grass park. It's not sod, it's not maintained in the way that some of the other parks are. This place is intentionally all native grass and pollinators. So as such, it's not maintained in that same way. So there are tall grasses that grow at certain times of year. So interesting opportunities and challenges with that sort of landscape. Here's also a quick glance at just kind of the local flora and fauna in this space, which can sometimes be an inspiration for the work. Obviously, it's a very heavily used dog walking trail. There's a lot of residential space around this trail. So lots of neighbors are walking their dogs and enjoying the space. But there's also, coyote activity, other local wildlife. And here's just some really nice images of native grass, milk thistle, sunflowers, and other wildflowers that inhabit the space. And then even though it is sort of a more natural space, a little less manicured, there are already some spots here that you can see where the ground is leveled and cleared with crusher fines of concrete. So there are spaces already in place with benches and different areas with information. This type of crusher fine or pavement would probably be a requirement around any new sculptural works, but it's always a case-by-case consideration. I will be meeting with the parks team this week to learn a little bit more about the space and just kind of be aware of any areas that we can or cannot consider so that once the finalists are chosen, I can provide a lot more technical documents with collaboration from the parks team in terms of irrigation or anything else, grade and technical things that the finalists would need to know. hopefully that gives you a little idea of just what the area looks like. Obviously, if you're from Denver, if you live in the area, I encourage you to go take a walk, go see the space. If you are from out of state or just further away, you can really still see a lot on Google Maps and online. But here are the project goals. So these are the themes that the panel themselves chose in our orientation meeting. So these are things to consider when you, like if you were a finalist, these are things that they hope the artwork will inhabit. Again, this panel is really pretty open, which is nice. Sometimes we get a really long list of goals that can be really intimidating, but they just really hope that the artwork that is chosen just helps beautify the area even more and just kind of contribute to it being a really visually inviting environment. They really want to sort of um, in honor or in connection with the capital improvement project. They hope that the artwork itself can help encourage people to walk or bike along this corridor, to spend time there, and to sort of, get out of the car and be on this trail. Because this is a space of movement, transition, and connection, that may be a theme that the artwork could play with, but they didn't feel extremely strongly about that. But they just really do feel strongly that it's welcoming and accessible for a broad and diverse public. All of our artworks that are commissioned must be ADA compliant, and throughout the proposal process, and definitely after an artwork is commissioned, we on the team can help provide some advice on ways to make the artwork, more accessible. But this is important to the group, especially because it's an outdoor public trail, and they want to make sure anyone on that trail can also engage with the artwork in the same way. And then something else we talked about in the orientation meeting is this area in general has some interesting transportation history. It, is a suburb of Denver and was one of the early suburbs to have streetcars and rail lines, and it continues to be heavily serviced by our regional transportation district and has light rail and buses that, we have a lot of people who live out here and then might commute to downtown Denver. So it's a small history of the place. So they just noted that as maybe something that could inspire a theme within the artwork. But again, I feel comfortable saying that it wasn't an extreme priority for them. They really wanted to keep it open and not define exactly what the artists need to respond to. So that's kind of a nice gift. It's a pretty excited and flexible panel. Okay. So yeah, again, like I said, sometimes the panels have a really long list of goals that can be very intimidating to an artist of how do we respond to every one of these things. I don't think that's the case on this project, but I always want to include this note that when you see the project goals and themes, it's not that you have to check off every single box. Sometimes that's impossible. You're encouraged to interpret the goals creatively, excuse me. And if you are selected as a finalist, you'll have an opportunity to meet with the community members and members of the panel, and that's where you can really kind of get a sense of which things are most important to them. And again, these sites and material, we've referred to a lot of this, but this is the language in the RFQ. So the panel has identified their preferred locations be in or near Prairie Park, which is a green space that runs along Buchtel Boulevard. And they hope that this artwork can help encourage pedestrian and cyclist activity and beautify the area while respecting the natural environment. So you saw those images of just how much, plant life and wildlife there is. So they obviously want an artwork that's not going to negatively impact the earth. And that it is a medium suitable for outdoor display, but they're really open to a wide range of media as long as it's appropriate for the outdoor environment. Okay, and then so our statement of interest, like I said, sometimes those questions do vary. In this case, they are unique. These are questions that the panel chose and crafted themselves rather than just kind of a boilerplate question. So these are what they want every artist who applies to the RFQ to spend some time thinking about and to include their answer for. The first is, what experience do you hope public art could offer for people at this site? And the second question is, how does your art practice relate to a place primarily experienced through movement and travel. All right, here is the projected timeline. So this is a preset timeline. So we have meeting dates already assigned on the panelist calendar. So moving them is really not an option, or at least extremely difficult. So we do ask that if you apply to this call and if you are chosen as a finalist, that you keep that June 8th date clear because that is already set as the finalist presentation date. I also post the timeline just to give artists an idea of kind of what that proposal period is, kind of how quickly you would have to turn around a proposal. In this case, it's pretty comfortable. It's a little over 7 weeks. Some calls you'll see can be as short as 4 weeks, and some can be longer than 7 weeks. I'd say on average, it's around 6 weeks with ours. But so so we'll meet in April and choose our finalists, and then you'll have until June 8th to present your proposal. And one other thing, so this note at the bottom. So this is a bond funded project. So the money from the capital improvement project is from a general obligation bond, and those have a deadline for when those funds have to be spent. So as such, we do have a deadline on this of when the project would need to be installed. That deadline is the end of 2027. So I just point that out along the way. Obviously we're not anywhere near that stage, but it's always good to prepare mentally of like, okay, if I was chosen as the artist, do I think I could deliver an artwork by that deadline? Some projects have, a much longer timeline and some have much shorter. And then I just added this recently, just kind of some things that have come up in some previous calls that I think are helpful for artists to know. Again, this is not immediately applicable to the RFQ, but it's just kind of looking forward and thinking of kind of what you would be asked to do if you were chosen as a finalist, and just kind of good things to know because the process is a little different from city to city. So the first thing I wanted to point out is when you apply for the RFQ, then we set up every panelist individually and they score all of your work individually. Then we take that top percentage of scored applications and we meet as a group in a virtual meeting and we deliberate until the panel chooses 3 to 5 finalists. The number of finalists is really determined by the panel and also informed by the budget. So the more finalists there are, there's more choices, but if you choose less finalists, you save a little more budget for the project. They usually go with 5, but there are instances where they'll choose just 3 or 4. And if you are someone who applies to the RFQ, but your work is not included in that top percentage that is discussed in the group meeting, I have fairly limited feedback that I can provide. So when we choose our finalists, notifications will go out to those finalists, but also anyone who was not moved forward as a finalist. And we're always open to if you want feedback on your application. Sometimes it does take a little while to get back to you. But if you don't move forward to that final group, I can still tell you what your average score was and sort of where it ranks in the overall pool. And if panelists left comments during their individual rules, I can share those with you. If you are selected as a finalist, you're asked to present your proposal, and what it needs to include is a concept narrative and illustration, notes on materials and installation, maintenance and projected budget and timeline, and obviously a lot more information will be provided if and when you're chosen as a finalist. One thing that I wanted to point out is we meet only virtually. That's changed basically since COVID. There are some times where a panel might meet in person, but in general, you want to sort of assume that it's a virtual setting. So sending like material samples or maquettes, unfortunately, isn't possible, but you can share those virtually in your presentation. And the panel makes their decision based on the presentations alone. And then on a very rare occasion, if the panelists cannot make a decision, if they just don't feel good about any of the proposals, there can be rare instances where we ask finalists to make changes and re-propose. But in that case, they would be paid an additional honorarium and be given additional time to make those changes. Okay. And we're almost to questions. Thank you for being patient. I saw a couple things come through the chat, so I'll refer to those first, but I just want to point out you should already be aware of this because you may have found the RFQ on these locations, but if not, you can find all of our RFQs, all of our current opportunities either on the Denver Public Art website or through callforentry.org because that's where we route all of our applications for. They all go to Cafe to be applied to. We have a lot of projects coming up, a lot of those bond funded projects. So you will see, a wide variety over the next, year. So keep an eye out. And yeah, so let me pause now. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation screen just so I can see your faces and we can take questions that you might have on the call itself or the program and process. Okay. Let me take a look at the chat first. Okay. So we do have one question about being able to provide dimensions of the area where the public artwork will be installed. At this point, I can't give you much more specific other than just it's within that 14-acre Prairie Park landscape. So as we get to the finalist phase where we have more input from Denver Parks and Rec, we may be able to narrow that down a little further of, this area, yes, and this area, no. But at this point, it's defined as within the the acreage of Prairie Park. So on Buchtel Boulevard between Colorado and University. One thing that I meant to call out a little more explicitly when we talked about painting. So as you may be able to infer from the pictures or if you visited the space, there is not like a pre-existing wall or building that is sort of primed for a mural. This is just an outdoor green space. So if you are a muralist, that would be a creative challenge for this call. This call would perhaps be a little more suited to three-dimensional sculptural work. That said, though, there's many creative ways that artists approach that, or there's collaborations that happen where muralists might work with a 3D artist, or they might send their work to be sort of fabricated through like laser cut metal or different ways. But so not to discourage anyone who is a muralist, but just to call out that this is sort of just a blank canvas, green space without sort of a structure to put a mural on in place. All right, that's it for the chat questions. If anyone else on the call has questions, feel free to raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Do you think the committee is more interested in like having one central, like one more, large sculpture, something that's real significant, or to try to do smaller pieces and like, carry through the whole space?
Yeah, good question. Um, I think the panel in terms of just concept would be open to either, especially because they want it to be something that encourages people to kind of travel along the trail. But they didn't specifically call out that it needs to be sort of a multi-piece work. I have had other projects, like a similar one on the Highline Canal that did specifically call that out. This one, they did not. So as far as I know, they're just as interested in a singular piece as they would be in a multiple piece. I would say for $120,000 that you're going to be pretty limited in what you could do with multiples at scale, because that was a challenge on the last project, which was like 110,000. It really kind of made the pieces really, much smaller in scale. But it totally depends on what you're working with and what your idea is. But I would not say that this panel is particularly drawn to like a multi-iteration.
Good.
Yeah.
I think it is tight for doing
Yeah.
too many. You'd have to have them be really small, and not
Yep.
that that couldn't be great too, but
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting challenge. But yeah, this panel just they are one of the more open panels I've had recently in terms of just like we just want to see what artists think would look pretty here and what would help give the space a little love and encourage people to spend time there. So that can be really freeing or a little scary if you're kind of not sure where to start. But this call will be open till March 16th. If something does come up that you're like, oh, I'm confused now, I should have asked, my email is on the RFQ itself and included in this meeting, so you can always shoot me a message if there's something that you think of later. Rena asked, if a concept calls for concrete, will the city pay for that? That's a really good question. And generally the answer is no. So if you have to do like a concrete mow band or some foundation, that is expected to come out of your budget. I will say that we do also hold a contingency. So before I even post that 120, I've already pulled out a contingency, and we do hold that in a lot of times for things like that. If there's just kind of extra parks requirements or things like that that you have to pay for, we try and help in every way we can. But in general, like Parks and Rec is not going to pay for any of that. It would need to come out of the project budget. Yeah. Is there electricity nearby for sculptures is the question. As far as I know at this time, I would assume there is not. But like I said, I'll be meeting with the park supervisors this week. And by the time finalists are chosen, I will have a little more information. But from what I've been able to determine so far, it doesn't look like there is. And I do know that Parks and Rec as a department is really trying to move away from having additional electrical elements, and they would prefer that artists would work with solar, if anything else. Okay, so now we're just going to switch gears and talk about how to apply through CAFE, callforentry.org, if this is your first time. It is a third-party vendor that we use for all of our calls, but it's also used nationwide for not just only public art, but for exhibitions and lots of different projects. So if this is your first time, you may use it again for many different other projects. So it's good to be familiar with it because it is sort of one of the big players in that field. Here we go. Okay, so if it's your first time, like I said, I would recommend, starting to look at this website now to just kind of get comfortable, and you'll find that you'll have to upload your images to a portfolio here before you can apply to the call. So factor in a little bit of time to do so. This is what the home page will look like. And when you go to the upper right corner, there is a login selection and a drop down that will say artist or admin. You'll want to select the artist login to sort of build up your portfolio and to find calls and to apply. So then you'll be directed to your login screen, which is, pretty standard. Of course, you'll have to agree to the terms and conditions and create a password, but then you can have this login that you can use for any other number of calls. It is free to create an account, and for our calls, anything that you apply for from Denver Public Art will also be free. If you see a application fee on any Denver Public Art call, please email the project manager because it should always be free. That's not always the case with, other calls. But so basically you'll go through this process where you can see these arrows up top kind of show you kind of going from left to right, the steps that you will go through. The steps to apply, it'll first ask you to build your portfolio. Well, first, actually, my profile, it will probably ask you your name and just contact information. That will show up on your application. So make sure that it is all correct contact info because that is where your email notifications, whether you are selected or not, will be sent to. So yeah, you'll build your profile, make sure all your contact info is accurate and up to date, and then you'll start uploading images to your portfolio. Once your portfolio is built out, you can then apply to calls and search and find this one and then check out. So the portfolio section is what takes the longest. But what's nice is you can upload up to 100 images and kind of have this bank of your images ready so that if you apply for another call, you can just select these again. You don't have to re-upload them for every call that you're applying to. So you'll choose upload media. And then as you can see here, this is where it takes quite some time. So all of these fields are required for each image that you upload. Like I said earlier, it does need to be a JPEG. That's just a requirement of Cafe, and it does need to be at least 1200 pixels or larger. You'll know because it'll tell you that it can't upload it if it doesn't meet those specifications. As far as sort of the height, width, depth, do your best to estimate the size if you don't know. It is required, so it won't let you proceed without it, but just give us a ballpark of, what the scale of this work is, as well as the remaining information. If it is not a work that was a public art piece, you can select no for art in public places. And there's that description box where you can add some additional contextual information that I referred to earlier of like, this was made in collaboration, or this is a detail shot of the other piece, just anything that would be helpful for the panel to know as they look through your images. So you just go through this process until you have uploaded all the images that you wish. And then you proceed to the find call section on the upper ribbon, and you search by event title. So you can search Buchtel, you can search Denver. You can find it in lots of different ways. If you can't find it, please let me know, but it should pull up pretty easily. You can even kind of further narrow it down there on the left by selecting public art as the call type. Once you find this call or something else that you're interested in, you'll click on that, view more info or apply to this call. And then this is where you can upload your resume and save. And this is also below where it says, please submit a statement of interest. This is where I was talking about, since you have to copy and paste it, to make sure that it has copy and pasted without any sort of weird characters or formatting errors. So just take a minute to make sure that looks the way you want it to, because sometimes it does come in a little funny. And then you save it. And you can always save at any stage here and return back to it later once you log into your account. And then save your application there at the bottom. And then you go to the checkout page, which, as I said, should always be free for our calls. If not, we definitely want you to let us know, because that means that a setting is incorrect. So if you get through this process and you have a technical issue with sort of how to apply through Cafe, that's not necessarily a question that goes to me in the Denver Public Art question. It's a question that goes to Cafe. So they have that Cafe help option right there up top, where you can email them, cafehelp@wearecreativewest.org. You don't need to remember that because you can just click on Cafe Help. And they're really responsive. They're actually based in Denver, and they get back to you pretty quickly, and they can help you with any just sort of weird technical thing if you're having trouble uploading or submitting your application. And that's that. It can be a little intimidating at first, but once you go through it once or twice, it's pretty easy. And then, like I said, you can use those images and a lot of that information again for other calls that you're interested in. Great. Okay. Well, I hope that was helpful. Spend some time exploring that website. Definitely reread the RFQ. And if you think of any more questions, please send me an email.